I can't wake up one day and say I'm going to be more an authentic leader.
It's just almost obvious, isn't it? It's almost too obvious.
Think about the way in which human beings behave in the workplace. But then if you start to look at what is this leading to in terms of our overall organisational KPIs and strategic objectives. And as soon as someone says to me, we're never making a decision, I worry about that.
So, Johanna, we're here today, two friends and a cup of tea, and we are just having a relaxed conversation around leadership, habits, and I guess the future of HR. So just before we get into all of that, do you want to start by just introducing yourself?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I'm Johanna Beresford, CEO and founder of FabricShift, an organisational psychologist business with a technology platform.
And just an all-round badass. So it's good that we've got you. So let's just start. How have we ended up here today?
So I think how we ended up here today. It's a long story, but we're really trying to think about the way in which human beings behave in the workplace, the future of HR, a little bit about leadership, what the future of leadership is, and how there's a lot of noise at the moment and how we cut through some of that noise, and what are the simple things that humans, people and leaders should be focusing on.
That's brilliant. And I think you could talk, especially after the recent budget, you could sort of pick up on the productivity element about how those elements are really impacting that. So over our time of working together, we've worked with some great companies, some great brands, and some small unknowns. And the focus has always really been around actually how do we improve? And I've seen you firsthand grab hold of situations and facilitate sessions with boards and C-suites. Just thinking about those, what are your reflections on our times now, and how we can really use habits and behaviours as a real competitive edge?
Yes. So, Stephen, I think one of the things that I should probably spend a little bit of time on, because we all talk about behaviour change, we all talk about culture, people talk about organisational performance, productivity, and there's lots of often buzzwords in the psychology, leadership, HR space, and sometimes we overcomplicate things. And the work that we have done really over the last 7 or 8 years has really been premised on how do you drive sustainable behaviour change, not how do you put in an initiative that is fashionable at a single moment in time, but how do you genuinely nudge behaviour change at scale within an organisation. And we have been doing academic research with businesses all around the premise that if you want to change behaviours, I can't wake up one day and say I'm going to be more authentic leader, I'm going to be more empathetic leader, I'm going to be an aspirational leader, whatever these behaviour traits may be, and that somehow will happen, because we are so busy, human beings are so busy every single day. It's really hard to just say, and the psychology of things such as I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to become fitter, I'm going to give up smoking, I'm going to reduce my alcohol intake. We often set those things up to fail because these are large goals, or they're big behaviour change, big swings in the way that we were behaving to where we want to be. And so there has been a body of research, particularly over the last 10 years, that really shows if you break down behaviours into habits. So what's a habit? A habit is a single action that you can repeat in many occasions. So it's not something that you can just do once every few days. It's got to be something that you can do frequently, at least one time a day. And it moves from being a conscious to an unconscious action. And so in its simplest form, if you break down organisational behaviours into habits, you're more likely to nudge a culture than saying, this is the culture we want to be, these are the behaviours that we want to be. You've got to really think about what are the single actions that people can do to move from that conscious to that unconscious action.
And I'm guessing in that you need to be a lot more intentional. So, and I guess where we are in society, we need to go into a lot more depth around and having some uncomfortable conversations that basically then help us either drive social behaviours within our workplaces that lead to greater commerce. So I guess just based on what you've just described, are there any habits that or behaviours that have come out of the work that you've done where you would actually encourage organisations to look at, to go and have those intentional conversations?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we again often put words on walls. You know, I think if every organisation got rid of their values, we'd probably be in a good place. And some people would argue against that. And I think if a value is really woven into the fabric of an organisation, it's very, very powerful. But 9 times out of 10, the work we do is we ask people within organisations, tell me your values. And for most of the businesses, large, small, medium, that we work with, the majority of the workforce can't describe the values. So whilst the company has been intentional and has good reason and has tried to really articulate these values, people struggle with being told, that's your value. This is your value, Johanna, this is your value. And beliefs as well. People really actually fundamentally don't like being told, this is your value or this is your belief system. People are far more comfortable with, actually, the way that we work at FabricShift is we see these are the behaviours that are going to drive success in our business. And people understand a behaviour is much clearer. It's not this abstract construct as values often are. But even a behaviour is, as I said, quite a big thing for someone to say, this is the way I behave now, I want to behave like this. Habits are, as I said, these single actions that are easy for people to remember. And because they're easy for people to remember, they're more likely that you will do them and you will repeat them and you'll commit to them. So if we give an example of a habit, of a cognitive habit, I will always ask a question before I give my point of view. And so if you say that this is a habit that we think will drive innovation in our business because we are being intentionally inquisitive. And it's not that I'm just doing that action because I'm making sure that I do that action. I'm doing that action, and if it leads to something positive, I'm more likely to do that action tomorrow. I'm more likely to do that action the next day.
The whole reward piece.
So it's this whole reward thing. So to make a habit sticky, there has to be a reward. If there isn't a reward, someone stops doing it. So in the case of, I always ask a question before I give a point of view. I can talk extensively of this because it is a habit. I do this now. I don't even realise I do it. And so I hear things from particularly my team that I wouldn't if I spoke first. If I spoke first, they would not always, but often follow my lead, my thought process, my idea focus. And we've done some really great experiments with boards. So often you see in a board, the CEO chairs the board. The CFO has often got a very prominent, strong voice in that board. If you shift the simple habit that CEO and that CFO and those the most influential, the strongest voices in that board,
voices, I guess,
always ask a question before they give a point of view, that board will transform in 3 months. I guarantee it. Single action, single habit. So the power that adopting a habit, doing that intentionally, it leading to a reward, but doing it at scale, this transforms behaviours and cultures within business. And focusing on something simple, single, everyone is doing it, will nudge your behaviour far more than any set of values has ever.
And I guess, obviously, you've developed a system called HabitTrack, which reinforces that. So it gives people the opportunity to share the habit that they're working on, to gain that internal societal support, really, that community support, I guess,
Yeah.
is what I would do to keep it simple. And I love the fact that when you're describing that one board element leads, it's just almost obvious, isn't it? It's almost too obvious that because we get so engaged and we're so thinking that as the leader, we're the expert, we're actually just taking that pause for thought, holding a moment just to allow other people to collect their thoughts and contribute. All of a sudden, you're creating a really good collective narrative from others. So that one habit then effectively, I'm guessing, feeds down into the organisation as people experience that behaviour themselves. They then spread that into the organisation, which means you start releasing the flow of information even more, the buy-in and the commitment.
Yeah. And building on that Stephen, I think that's the other thing that we often don't do as well as we could do within organisations. And often the intent is there, but there are so many initiatives often that come out of leadership and HR and psychology within organisations, and how are we measuring the impact of that? If you are able to demonstrate, and the reason that we've built our technology platform is if you're able to get people to commit to a habit, show that they are tracking that habit over periods of time, show what that's leading to, the point I was making earlier, it's leading to something positive at an individual behavioural level. But then if you start to look at what is this leading to in terms of our overall organisational KPIs and strategic objectives, you can start to really look at the relationship between behavioural change and organisational performance. And that, I think, is so different to a lot of the work that definitely I did in our HR and L&D days, which was, we think we've got a capability gap and we spend a lot of time developing that capability gap, whereas actually what's the thing that is going to drive at scale a culture change, an organisational change within a business? It's behaviours. It really is behaviours, because capability gaps are still things that you need to look at. But if you're wanting to really kind of drive organisational performance, it 9 times out of 10 is to do something with behaviours. And so if you can measure these, and if you've got a way of measuring them and linking those to your organisational KPIs and what, not just the correlation between those, but which seems to be having a greater cause on which variables. And we've built now a really extensive data model that starts to look at some of those variables. On the point, Stephen, that you're also making about this community one, I wanted to pick up on this, because this is, again, the power of being an organisation is the collective knowledge that we have. And we know this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yet most businesses, everything is set up on this one-to-one individual. So your success, your pay, your bonus, your review is all about how you perform or how I perform. Still now in 2025. Yet actually the success of how we perform in a business is not anything to do with you nor my performance individually. It's how we, it is the collective. And so if you want to say, right, actually we need to grow our business by 40%, we need to increase our customer engagement, our NPS scores by 30%, they're really dropping in this region. It's the collective, not the individual, that you really need to focus on in that, because it's the relationship between your sales function, your back office function, it's never a single thing that leads to customer NPS or growth within an organisation. Yet we constantly look at this individual performance, and everything about performance or reward is reinforced in this one-to-one relationship. Whereas we fundamentally know from a psychology, from a social science perspective, that the thing that we're trying to achieve is the collective. So how do you start to reward and reinforce behavioural change by community, so by peer-to-peer learning? And so that's really what we've built in. It's not that I'm just interested in how I'm behaving, what I'm doing, but we are openly observing each other's in a way where we can say that real time. We call it 360s real time. It's not waiting for an end of year. It's this kind of real time reinforcement. But I can be very specific because I'm observing your habits and your single actions.
And I guess that brings us to a really good point, which is when you're feeding back on that habit. You're not necessarily feeding back on the person. Yeah. So therefore we take away that awkwardness that we've both experienced in our career with some of our previous colleagues. But literally you're reaching a moment where also you're changing the dynamic of feedback. So all of a sudden there's something really positive that the person's trying to commit to, that you're then nudging through your own behaviour to get that outcome for good. And I think just going right back to part of our early conversation, which was around the whole strategy piece and the values, I do find it amazing that people or organisations plaster on their walls all these really great words, and there are some fantastic ones that make me laugh, and there are other ones that make me sad, unfortunately, because I just feel that they've misunderstood it. But we both know from sort of our experience that strategy needs behaviour, and they often get called values, but actually where I guess a lot of C-suite can go awry is they don't have that intentional conversation or that intentional review of, if we're pivoting our strategy or we need something new in our strategy, are we mapping those behaviours?
Yeah.
So just would love to get your thoughts on that to drive the sort of commerciality, productivity piece.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely it. Like starting from where are we now as an organisation? What are the things that are working? What are the things that aren't? To your point, where do we need to pivot? What are the things that actually we need to focus on? And the behaviours come from that. Versus what happens in many organisations is we have a set of values and then we try to align a set of behaviours, or we start saying, okay, what are the behaviours we want? Those are really important questions, and it's not that they shouldn't form part of it, but What's first question should be, where are we going and what behaviours do we need to get there?
Absolutely.
And if you do that, then that also reinforces, and I was in a great conversation with 3 separate customers this week, all big organisations, and all 3 in separate conversations said to me, Johanna, the problem is, you know, in our business, over times when we've started to decline, when growth has started to decline, it's when we've deviated from who we are and what we're supposed to do. Okay. And so, and what do I mean by that? Like when the strategy becomes awry of like, this is the core of who we are, and this is the purpose of what, not the purpose, but this is what we serve. This is what we do. Do. We are a bank. We are a telecommunications organisation that provides network and is secure. When we start tinkering too far around the edges, it becomes really hard to say, really, what is our strategy? What are our objectives, and what are the things that we're delivering? And therefore, what are the behaviours? Because if you have an organisation where there's part of your business that is core is to do this, and another part that's core, the behaviours in the business are going to be different.
But
and
you're
so you will have
conflict.
Yeah, and this is where conflict. And so one of the things, and why do we know most acquisitions fail? Because although two businesses may have complementary things that you can offer to customers, if they aren't, and if they aren't close enough the same, the behaviours in a business are different. Therefore, conflict happens. So to see this time and time again is that it's about understanding the behaviours you need for the context of your organisation, the moment in time that you're in.
Yeah.
Could be crisis, different set of behaviours you need when you're in growth. And so these are important points, that these can't be things that are static. It's not I can create a set of values that are going to serve us for the next 10 years. And some organisations come back, do that very well. So I'm not saying, but behaviours cannot be static. They can't be something that I write and we don't revisit for 10 years. They might stand us well for 3 years, but they might only be for a year, whilst we're getting out of crisis mode to whatever's going on in our business. And I think this is really important. This is when L&D and HR, I think, can come into their own to say, actually, do this one thing really well, and it's going to have the greatest impact on people engagement, productivity, and performance, without all this other fluff and noise that sits alongside often what we see in this kind of overload of initiatives.
I think you're absolutely right. I think 3 observations that I would give is I've never seen leadership teams so fearful. Mm-hmm. So I've never seen them so distracted. And I guess I've seen evidence that actually if they were a little bit more disciplined, they'd get a lot more sort of return. And I think all of those 3 things, the thing that those 3 things have in common is the fact they're all behavioural driven. Mm-hmm. So I think from a fear suite, it's a hard economy out there. So people are having to dig deep. They're questioning. We've come out of COVID where people were questioning their fundamental purpose, and what they want. We saw lots of migration of people around. So we saw a lot of behavioural change through COVID. That's now coming through as generations now come into the workforce and elements like that. So we've almost got these different sets of behaviours happening. So for me, I guess it's almost for companies to be really clear on the behaviours that they want for their success, not without, they don't need to be belligerent about what the individual's behaviours are. And I guess we've had a conversation with a client this week around a code of conduct and actually how the code of conduct can be a really useful tool in setting out the behaviours, both what we want and what we don't want, because we also have to be careful in HR that we don't just go with the positive all the time, and that we really call out some of those behaviours that are not desired in our businesses. Mm-hmm. That I think back to some of the cultures we've worked in where I guess gossiping was allowed, and it became quite toxic quite quickly. And as soon as I think it was you or I had conversations with people to say this isn't acceptable in our environment, it's just not what we're about, all of a sudden behaviour shifted, performance went up, and we started becoming more curious as a team. Which I think, again, we just look back at our time of working together and it's just behavioural driven. Even though we've delivered some fantastic big technical projects with IT systems that people would be proud of, I think that you and I always come back to if you're not having a really good conversation about behaviour first, you're almost set up for doom or a doom loop until you have that conversation in your systems implementation, your project implementation.
Yeah.
So obviously we've worked together for a long time. If I was new coming through, so like a Gen Z, what advice would you give me about really how can I have a real good conversation with a leader about behaviours so I am managing upwards, not just waiting to be managed downwards?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think one of my biggest kind of piece of advice for anyone that's coming into the workforce, returning to the workforce, is to really observe as much as you can, and to absorb as much as you can. And it sounds a bit of a cop out, Stephen, but I think that sometimes we have expectations or overthink things. So this kind of observation and being in absorption mode. And the second piece is around behaviours and not just for Gen Z, but it's like, the things that you do that mean that you often work really well. And so, and you'll have a very different perspective to someone that has been in an organisation for a long time, that has been in an industry from a long time, and knowing how valuable that is, Stephen, like knowing how valuable your own kind of sets of behaviours or the way that you're doing things, and not to introduce those in a way that can become very confrontational, but to be to observe, to see, and to we can nudge others' behaviours by asking questions, by observing, by listening, but it's not that those that are more senior in an organisation are necessarily going to be the ones that have the best sets of behaviours, so that it's not that you are observing to follow someone else's behaviour. You're observing to I always say this, like, to notice the good and the bad, the things that you think, actually, these are leading to conflict. These are leading to us going round in circles. These are leading to, and
the
then
bureaucracy,
being, and so when you start to be able to recognize, and this again is like not just for someone that is young or coming into the workforce, but like if human beings, we can start to think, when we do this, not when that person does it, not as soon as you say, Stephen, you did this, you're
straight
not going to
conflict. Yeah.
As soon as you start to just reframe that and say, I've observed the way we seem to work here is we do this, whatever that habit is. And so you reverse engineer it. You go, I observed that we are doing this habit a lot. We are this or this behaviour, whatever, people. Some people get very funny on the language, but the wording. But I've observed us doing this. Hopefully it's a habit, so it's very specific. But I've observed us doing this, and it's leading to this outcome. This outcome would be something that isn't what we're trying to get. Do we think we could try it a different way? When people start to have those types of conversations, they don't always go well. So let's be clear. Yeah. But it's more likely that will go well as a conversation than if someone came to me and said, Johanna, do you know what? When you're in a meeting and you do this, it really annoys me. Because all I would think was, okay, it might really annoy you, but what's that mean? We've got different styles. If someone says, when we're doing this, it's leading to us never making a decision on that. As soon as someone says to me, we're never making a decision, I worry about that.
Well, you're disrupting, aren't you?
Yeah. Why aren't we making a decision? There's something about how I'm leading my business that means that we're not making decisions. We've got to fix that. I understand that's a problem. It's a problem I'm really happy to try and go and solve. They've made it not about the own person's behaviour, especially if it's someone more senior. So the way in which we can feed up is the same as the way we feed down.
Yeah.
As soon as you start to do this, there's some great research in neuroscience which shows what happens to our brain. As soon as you say the word feedback, the same thing happens as when we go into fight or flight. And so this you respond in a very aggressive way because you're in this fight or flight mode. That's what happens to your brain at that point of the word feedback. Yeah, we still use it all of the time. Yeah. Whereas if it's just, have you noticed we do this? All of a sudden, there is no aggression. It's very unlikely someone will respond in a defensive way to that.
And I guess that's because you're moving away from the person, me as an individual, and you're talking about something that is observable. I think you said something really interesting there about language. So let's just go back to, I guess, the definition of a behaviour.
Yeah. So a behaviour is the way in which we do something. So
repeatable, observable.
Yeah. So the way that we act, and a habit is a single action. It's a single action, and that's the distinction. And so habits kind of sit under essentially behaviours.
Yeah.
And we can describe a set of behaviours in an organisation that we want to really focus on, and the habits are the things that sit underneath those behaviours to help describe them. But they're the things that if you do, it will lead to that end behaviour.
So you know that part of what I'm looking at the moment is work design, and one of those really interesting things is that we sort of have really focused on people over the last 20, 30 years. We've 30 years of programming people around feedback and elements like that. And in the stuff that I'm sort of researching on work design, it feels like that when we've gone from like the 1950s industrial, how people were managed, they fitted into a system, work was key, people fitted into that we've sort of pulled away from that. So, and I think when it comes to work design, there is an absolute part in there around behaviour. So where you're describing, especially with AI coming in. So I just want to move the conversation on into work design and AI. I know it's not a subject I prepared you for, so we're all good. But I do think that we all fit into systems, because one of your other big areas is systems thinking, and I always get it wrong. So model-based systems engineering, isn't it? So this isn't just about the fluffiness of a topic. This is about the hard engineering, the neuroscience elements like that. So we've got work design. We know we've shifted a bit from the industrial era. We now focus on people rather than the work that they do. We're seeing impacts on well-being, psychology, you know, the psychological safety and elements like that. So we're there at the moment. It feels like we're in the midst of a storm of behaviours that aren't necessarily being managed. Or if they are, people are frightened of dealing with the dark side of behaviour, I guess, and pulling people out. So 2025 has been a really interesting year for the HR profession. I don't think I've heard it. I don't think I've heard it talked about so negatively as I have in this last year, and its disconnect from commercial outcome, productivity, and elements like that. So as we start to think about the future, 2026 is on the horizon. What is the future of, let's take it in turn. So one is AI. What's the future of AI within the habits and behaviour space? Then let's move on to what does HR need to look like for that? And then I guess the third part would be the leaders. Let's have a conversation about leaders, if you're up for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's start with the AI. What does that mean for behaviours and the way in which we work and the systems of a business? I think that we are in a time which is incredibly exciting. I'm an ever optimist, as you know, Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always. But this is not a technology change. This is a human change. And this is, yes, there's some incredible developments and ways in which AI is being developed, and I think that will only continue. How we as humans decide to use it is the thing that is going to drive how organizations look in the next 10, 20 and 30 years. And we have a choice. We have an absolute choice. We have an ethics choice around that. But it's just like anything else. It's just like any other change that's come into a business. It requires people to behave differently and have a different approach. And
the system they work in to be different as well, I guess.
System that they work in to be different. And so it is fundamental. It absolutely is fundamental. But before we had computers, it was fundamental. Before we had
mobiles,
it was fundamental. Everything. I think perhaps it could be argued that it is a greater change. There will be jobs lost. There will be a reskilling within organisations. But it really is that we have a choice. Firstly, we have a choice about how we use it, how we want to. It can drive productivity if you're focusing on the right thing. My biggest thing, and my same goes for all three questions you've asked: AI, HR, leadership, simplicity, and do less. And
better quality, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And everything, I was with an organisation that had just spent a lot of money on a AI leadership programme. They have spent a lot of money on their AI strategy. They have brought in lots of AI into the business, and productivity has gone down. There's starting to be quite a lot of research in this space and sightings of this. Why? And I spent a day with them.
Okay.
They have just done too much. And coming back to some of my earlier points, they haven't focused on the core of their business. So they've brought in AI in every part of their organisation rather than just the core. And I think it's like anything. If you're going to do something that is going to change, to your point, the system and the way that you're going to work, you have to bring that in, look at how it works, and you have to get depth. So you've got to focus on something and go, right, we think AI could help our business and have the biggest impact. Where's the biggest impact going to be? Here. It has to be something core to your business, something that is fundamental. Let's get that really, really working, and let's focus on that, and let's really be thinking, and rather than just bringing it into every part of work, and you have this kind of early adopters, you've got people that are resistant to it, you've got the majority of people that are somewhere in the middle, and it's very confusing to people about what does this really mean. There's also the additional piece with AI, which is like, it isn't like other changes, which is by bringing it in and embracing it, am I going to lose my job? And so everyone goes to work to get paid. There isn't a single person that doesn't go to work to get paid.
Yeah.
If it's going to risk my ability to live, to pay for food for my family, to have a good life, and I'm embracing this thing that could potentially put me out of a job, that's a very different scenario to you've got a computer that's going to help you work, or you've got the internet that's going to help you work.
And I guess if we jump the HR one for a second, because I think if we move on to the leadership stories, so we've both spoken to banks where one is effectively saying they will keep their head count, but they will just get doing more. Another one has turned around and gone out to their workforce and said, we're going to cut heads because we're using AI. There's two very, very different leadership stories there. And I guess you've got process thinkers, people that will use AI to enhance a process. And then there will be outcome thinkers, which is actually, I don't mind how the process is done anymore. I'm not going to be stuck on the process, but I want a really good outcome. So I think when it comes to the leadership side, I think we need to be careful that AI implementations aren't rudderless.
Yeah.
And that we go back to what we'd said earlier, that you have a strategy, you map out the behaviours, and map out the behaviours of the AI as well as the human workforce.
Yeah.
And then you can get into this real good work design, and then off you go. And I guess just listening to you on many a call when we've been presenting, a big chunk of it is that you can now use AI as the opportunity to filter out all the stuff that you've layered up because of bad process, bad behaviour, or whatever it would be. So actually, there's going to be a natural cleanse of the volume of work in organisations where you choose to go into AI, and actually you don't have to do it the way you've always done it.
Yeah.
And that's going to take real leadership courage and leadership behaviours. I just would love to get your opinion on that before we sort of carry on with that. Sorry, I know I'm throwing questions at you.
Yeah.
But it's that real leadership piece in AI, because I think you've spoken over 100 different leaders on this, so it'd just be good to get your perspective on it.
Yeah, I think it's. I want to word this in the right way. Leaders have a real responsibility, as I said, around the decisions that we make, and the implications this could potentially have for society. Those people that have access to information and learning around AI versus those that don't. We could essentially have a greater societal break,
polarization almost,
yeah, that's the word, around those that have greater productivity because they understand how to use it, and they've been taught and they understand that, versus those that don't. Is it going to entirely change the way in which we can work and how productive we are? Absolutely. Like, I am 60-70% more productive every single day because of the things that it enables me to do, from summarising my meeting notes to I'm writing a report. I put my report in, I ask what it thinks of it. It is incredibly powerful when you're asking it the right questions. And so what this means, Stephen, is those humans that retain their ability to critically think, those humans that always ask questions, and those human beings that are able to deal with lots of ambiguity are going to just excel, and they're going to excel in a way that is brilliant. But we know that with lots and lots of using AI, our cognitive memory, and if we were doing a skill and doing that repeated all the time, writing. Let's take writing. If I write a lot, if I sometime just stop writing and AI wrote everything from scratch from me, I would become, over time, not as good a writer as I was 6 months ago if I did that. So I was just going to
say the opposite way around, because I struggle with dyslexia and ADHD.
Yeah, but I would be, because I'm not doing that thing that is a skill to me. If I then went back and practiced it again, I pick it up very quickly. So it's it's something that I've learned. So if I always say this about my degree. I did a psychology degree 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you asked me something about biological psychology, I could answer you really well.
Yeah.
Now, you could ask me a question, I'd have to think longer, but I would be able to remember some piece of information. If I went then away for it and read for an hour, I'd be able to tell you loads, more than probably you would in an hour, because that's not your depth of expertise.
So it's muscle memory almost.
It's that muscle memory. So it's about making sure that how do we help? And this for me is the only role of leadership in this space. It's how do you make sure human beings are still learning and doing and having that cognitive piece within them, and we're not losing that.
Really good point.
And whether that links to like building graduates or just it doesn't matter. All of these, it's the same point of making sure that if something else is doing it, that we retain it. And no one's really talking about that. That for me is more important as a leader. I feel more responsible about making sure the people in my workplace stay critical thinkers, and have the ability and the skills that they've learned and they bring to us, that they retain those.
I think there's a bigger subject there about organisational knowledge management. Yeah. So because actually, as you're replacing, I guess there's just really reflecting on what you've just said, good leaders will use it as an elevator, an enhancer.
Yeah.
Other leaders will use it as a cost-cutting, I guess, replacement type of strategy. And I guess there's a hybrid where actually both could be right.
Yeah.
So I just was sort of reflecting on that. So we've talked about the AI element. We've talked about the leadership element, which we'll come back to. Let's move on to the HR element.
Yeah. So I think HR should be probably the most important function in organisations. I'm not saying that because I've spent 20 years working in it, genuinely.
I'm sure finance would give you an argument to that one.
But I think it should be. Why? Because every organisation, most organisations, a good majority of organisations, biggest spend people. Biggest spend people. Yet it doesn't have that seat at the table. There are some absolutely exceptional CPOs, and we are fortunate to work with a number of them.
Absolutely.
But as a function, we don't have that seat at the table. And we have spent an hour talking about that. We have spent many of our, our HR friends, our colleagues. And why is that? One reason, because we haven't really demonstrated how the work we do drives performance and money. Yeah. That's it. It's as simple as that. We are really bad at showing the data that human beings, why do people come back to this point? Why do people come to work? I go to work. Most people go to work to be paid. So let's not, these well-being initiatives, these productivity, come work to be paid and to do a job that uses the skills that I have. And that would, if I am in
you're effectively buying.
Yeah, if I'm in retail, if I'm an engineer, if I'm a plasterer, if I am a receptionist, you're buying my skills, and I therefore want to use my skills and have a positive impact. You know, I want to be able to use my skills to the best. And some people, not everyone, wants to develop those skills. That's why people go to work.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you know, are more engaged people likely to perform better? Yes. But does that I need an engagement strategy? No, I need to give that person meaningful work. I need to be motivated. I need people to have meaningful work and to use those skills. And so I think what's happened over the last 30 years and as HR professionals is that we've gone through lots of waves. You know, we've gone through the wave of like, how do you do performance management 15 years ago? And we changed a lot of like annual reviews don't work, these, you know, real time. We've gone through, okay, well-being is really important. Well-being is absolutely important. Understanding that inclusion is important. And we kind of go through these kind of ups and downs of what's fashionable in HR at the moment. And ultimately, it's very simple. People want to be paid and people want to be able to do something with their skills and within the role that they're in. And so when we really focus on that and say, actually, this is about how do I buy the best talent that I can for HR? How do I buy the best talent that I have? Put that talent with those skills in the right roles that means they're going to perform to the best. And how do I measure my employees against our organisational performance and look and the relationship between those three, and the habits and the behaviours sit in part of that because they're saying,
connect that, they connect it.
They're connecting, and if you really focused on that and you did less, and that was your focus, and every time a HR professional goes to a board and says, look, we're doing this and it's had an impact here, and everything is led from, here's our strategic objectives, here's our KPIs, and here's how the relationship between our employees and that. And we have to switch it. Versus we've got this head count, we've got this. We report on data in the wrong way in HR. And so I think we've got to flip it. And what that means by doing less is, it's not that I need 30 HR initiatives, because 30 HR initiatives confuse employees. We are going to do one thing and we're going to do that really well. And it's going to be embedded, and that becomes the way that we're working. And then we're going to, but anything that we do, and you know, we did this when we worked together, anything we are doing has to be driving where our strategy is for the organisation. If it isn't, don't do it.
And if I absolutely echo all of that. And I think there's another part to it, which is we're obviously seeing the move from HR to people. Mm-hmm. And I think for the first time in my career, having gone from being a personnel manager, going into a HCM manager, you know, the whole lot, I think it's the first time that I'm sort of seeing eyes open to the fact that every bit of business is around people.
Yeah.
So it's no longer just about a CPO, a chief people officer, just focusing on their own people. You know, it's when they're going into a procurement process, what value can they add into, you know, when they're selling their product or they're buying product. And it's about how CPOs, I guess, going forward in 2026, especially and beyond, with AI, how they can create that people connection, whether it's their employees or employees that they're working with. And I think just going back on some of those big processes that we were just talking about, HR has this wonderful ability to be really internally focused.
Yeah.
So, and I guess when you've got 30 projects in HR, is that you keeping HR busy, or is that HR doing the stuff that the business needs to get its outcome, that it's there to deliver its purpose, its ambition, its goal? So I think there's a real nice move happening that gives, and I think it's a window in time where all of a sudden people in senior HR roles can take a moment.
Yeah.
And they can think about the whole people proposition, whether that's in a customer, a supplier, or within their own organisation, and start redeveloping that relationship, because we're seeing more psychology within HR. We're seeing more mathematics, statistics.
Yeah.
We're seeing a whole load in there.
Yeah.
And I guess just in the work that we've done over the last few years, we're seeing that real drive and hunger for, I want to understand the people
Yeah.
and their impact on my business. And now AI, we're getting a very similar theme coming through of AI to really sort of understand it. So I think HR for 2026 it's a moment of reflection.
Yeah.
And is it about process? Is it about the rule book, which I think COVID told us that they don't survive when things go wrong? And is it now about really understanding people, understanding those behaviours, and then being able to equip HR teams to have the skill and capability to then have the knock-on effect of line managers to really be able to talk and have open conversations around behaviour? It's almost like they're frightened to, at the moment, HR professionals and line managers and senior leaders, to almost have these conversations, almost like behaviours are a dirty thing.
Yeah.
So I think my observations are that going into 2026, there's a refresh. Okay, there's a moment in time where you can literally say, right, we're now a proper people function. Yeah, we will do policy, we will do process. But again, to your point, if they are not adding to your strategic outcome, cut them. And I think we've just had this layering effect in HR and in business where something's not worked. And then we go, okay, let's put something else on top of that rather than actually fix the problem. So with the stuff we've talked about AI, stuff we've talked about leadership, stuff we've talked about HR and the systems element, there are real opportunities out there, aren't there? And I know you're an optimist and it's not all about jobs going with AI. So let's think about that one piece of advice that you would now give about how to be ready for 2026 and beyond.
So I think it's a great question. I think the single piece of advice would be for anyone is, and it's related to 2026, but I think it's for anyone in work, whether I'm a leader, whether I'm an employee, whether I'm a manager, is be accountable. And I think we've lost this notion a bit of actually every action, every behaviour, everything I do, I am accountable for. And if I want to become a CEO in a business, or if I want to have a more flexible working, or whatever that thing is, if I'm accountable for my decisions, the way I'm behaving and the way I'm performing, you're more likely, I'm accountable and responsible. And I think we've got into this environment where people think it's something else. It's the system of the business. It's the culture of the business. It's that leader isn't working. Okay, we'll make a decision about
those symptoms.
Those symptoms. You've got to be accountable. And I think that there are 3 leadership traits that in this going into 2026, I would say are really important. Critical thinking.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to think critically at any given point and in stress. Dealing with ambiguity. So the fact that we are in a world now, and we will always be in a world where you have to be able to deal with ambiguity. Nothing is clear. We talked about this strategy. We have a strategy, but to an extent, things will change, and being able to manage that well, that's quite rare. And then this third one of accountability and responsibility. If you are in a role of leadership, you have a huge amount of responsibility and accountability to many people based on your behaviours. How you behave, you have to be accountable for how you behave. You have control over it. And by thinking about it in that way, you are going to be far more conscious of your habits and your behaviours. And Stephen, I'd like, as the last question, to ask you, if you don't mind, what would be the 3 leadership traits you think are most important to go into 2026 with?
Again, great question. Thank you for that. I think the biggest one is openness. Mm-hmm. The world is changing at an absolute pace. And I think as we, first of all, the 3 behaviours, absolutely support them that you've described. I think openness, open-mindedness is a big one. Yeah. The world of commerce, the world of social, our social lives are changing. So I think the biggest one is you've got to be open to this new world that's out there. I think the second one would be getting into the detail. I think people have had years of being told they need to be strategic. I think that's been a massive distraction for a massive amount of people.
Yeah. Well, you know, my husband would echo you on that one.
And I think people have just forgot that the detail needs managing as well.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the work thing that I'm researching at the moment, the stuff that's coming out where, you know, people turn up in a job and people just expect the work to be there. And that's great, but that's mainly consultation, you know, consulting rather. And then I think the third one, would be a mixture, because they're both important. One, it's a triangle, so trust, integrity, and authenticity.
Yeah.
It's that combination of, I now need to start having some dark conversations around organizational behavior because something's not working.
Yeah.
And I can keep putting up posters of culture, and I can I like how you articulated. I can go and I can look and I can find, I can always find a problem, but actually, am I finding the root cause? And I think we have reached a point in organizational society where we have expanded, work has got busier, but the outcome has become less. And I think we're now getting into that place where there needs to be a more direct approach, not harmful, not hurtful, but more. And I think you have to be authentic, you have to have integrity, and you have to trust and be trusted to be able to really deliver that.
Yeah.
And I think some of the big dinosaur organizations that are resting on years and years of revenue are massively disrupted by AI. Yeah. And they can only control so much of it. So we've seen Google try to develop AIs over time. We've got Elon Musk doing similar things, you know, and there are some real integrity, I guess, B Corp organizations out there developing AI or tools that sit on top of AI that are going to be really disruptive. So if you can have a really honest conversation, you are doing it with good heart integrity, and you're being mindful of the impact that you have, then I think when you've got the openness, you could get your organizations into a really great place, but you've just got to be really intentional about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that actually answers your question.
No, it does.
But it's I just think that we are reaching a place where spin is no longer working. And I think there are many places in society and government we could look at for that. We know that we need to become more productive, and it's not been an overnight thing. It's been 20 years in the making nearly. I think it stems from 2008, those types of time, and even before that. And actually, people want to be productive. To your point, they want to come to work. They do want to earn money, but they want to do good work as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's our accountability to get leadership into a great place where it can start sorting that out.
Yeah.
And then reap the commercial benefits from it.
No, absolutely.
Johanna, thank you for your time as always. Great having a cup of tea and a chat with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. A cup of tea and a chat.